Good afternoon, good day, even anywhere you are around the world. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night. My name is Faith Temilola Oluwaseun. I'm a master's student in Netherlands in Institute of Water Education in Delft. I'm currently taking a master's degree in water and sustainable development, and with a focus on water, food, and energy. What else? Yeah, I had my bachelor's in aquaculture studies and fisheries management. And so for today, for July webinar, we have the honor of Alexandra in our midst. I'm sure she's gonna talk about herself a little bit, but I'll just read out who Alexandra is to us so we can have an idea of what she's gonna be teaching us and who we have in our midst today. Alexandra Azevedo has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Earth Science and Sustainability and a Master's degree in Applied Marine Science from the University of Cape Town. Her work in the environmental and marine science has led her to different corners of the globe, from Fiji to Antarctica. She's currently working at the Worldwide Fund for Nature in South Africa. So she's going to be taking us on careers as a marine scientist in a changing climate. Me as one, I am very, 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 very particular about this presentation because I have a lot to learn as a marine scientist. You have the floor now, Alex. I'd like to have you and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith and Paul and Aquaworld for inviting me to talk today. I'm so passionate about marine science and also helping others who are up and coming in the field because I know it can't always be super straightforward on where to go after studying. And so, yeah, I just want to offer my experience and be a resource to you guys when you're looking for your first job outside of studying as well. So yeah, I'll get into it so we can leave some time for questions at the end as well. So I'm just going to talk to you about how I came to be a marine biologist. If you can hear in my voice, I'm currently living in South Africa, but I'm not South African. I'm actually from the US, and I grew up in Chicago, which was an inland city. We only have a big freshwater lake, but for some reason, there was something that I was always attracted to me to studying the ocean. And all my family will tell you from as long as they can remember, my dream was always saying, I'm going to be a marine biologist. So I was really proud the day that I finally became one. But my first experience working in marine science was in 2012. I got the opportunity to go to Fiji and live there for a summer on a tiny little island of 100 people. And their coral reef had recently been destroyed by a hurricane. So I was helping them rebuild their fish houses. And from that point, I was so inspired and I really knew that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So when I went to get my bachelor's degree, I thought, I want to study marine science, but I felt that's very narrow and I love everything about the environment. And I knew from an early on that everything in the environment is connected. So I thought rather for my bachelor's degree, let me get a very broad degree. So I ended up studying environmental earth science and sustainability. And I also got really into food production at this time. And I was one of the founding members of my school's first organic farm. And we converted monoculture corn and soybean industrial agriculture to this beautiful photo that you can see here. And we were actually able to supply our school's restaurants with produce. And that really, really inspired me. And I really care about sustainability and the ways we generate our food. And during that time, studying for my bachelor's degree, I got to study abroad for a summer, and I stayed in the Azores Islands in Portugal. And I worked on island biogeography. So that is the study of looking at the endemic species, which is species that originated from that island versus introduced species. And that was really, really amazing. These islands are an archipelago in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And a lot of people say that they're the Hawaii of the Atlantic. And it was just another reassuring experience that I knew that I wanted to protect the ocean and these amazing, beautiful spaces for my life. And then I finally thought, okay, now is the time I'm gonna study marine biology. But I thought I can't do that right now where I'm living in Chicago, and I really wanted an experience studying abroad because I find that when you're getting exposed to different cultures and schools, you get a very more well-rounded area of education. So I was one of 6 people that got into my master's program in 2020 to study marine biology, and I said, I'm going. And I ended up staying here in South Africa during the entire pandemic and really knuckling down and just doing my schoolwork. And I had a really spectacular experience. But my degree here was very data driven, data heavy. So I did a lot of coding and things, which then I got the experience doing. And I knew that that's actually not what I wanted to do for my career. But again, it's great to have these experiences so that you know what you like and what you don't like, and that will help shape the idea of what you want to do in the future. So specifically for my master's dissertation, I moved to South Africa because I've loved sharks my whole life. So I was originally going to do my dissertation on shark bycatch in the offshore trawl industry in South Africa. But because of COVID, they wouldn't let me on the trawl vessels. So I just got leftover samples that were then frozen and delivered to me at my school. And so I was looking at these skates. So these are a kind of shark along with sharks and rays. And I just fell in love with these because everyone comes to South Africa and they want to study the big sharks, like the great whites. And no one seems to be looking at these benthic bottom dwelling sharks, but are called skates at the bottom of the ocean. And I just really loved studying them. And what I was doing, I had 2 goals. One was to find the trophic level of these skates. So it's basically analyzing all of their stomach contents. I looked at over 200 different samples and looking at what they eat and then calculating where they sit on this food triangle or the trophic level. And I found that they have a similar trophic level as sharks, and they're key ecosystem regulators. And in this offshore trawl industry in South Africa, 10 of the skates that I was examining could be caught for 1 hake. That's the main target fishery for that industry. And so it's really relevant to understand how important they are to the ecosystem when so many are being caught. And a lot of them are just discarded because there's not no one in South Africa is eating these skates. But sometimes they do get shipped to Asia, and then the wings are eaten in their shark soups and those types of things. The other thing that I was looking at during my master's was at what age and what length do they reach sexual maturity? And this is the very basis of what's important in fishery science, because when you can understand at what size a fish can reproduce, then you can tell fishermen, hey, do not catch this fish that's less than 45 centimeters. That means it's a juvenile. It hasn't had a chance to naturally reproduce in the wild yet. And that's very unsustainable if you're catching all of these juvenile fish. So only catch them when they've reached, say, above 45 centimeters, and then they've had a chance to reproduce. And that's when I really fell in love with fisheries, and it tied to my passion for food and sustainable food production that I talked about earlier. So I knew, okay, in the vast field of being a marine biologist, being a marine scientist, I really like working in fisheries because it has to do with conserving species and making sure that we're eating sustainably. So also during my master's, I got a chance to do some shark tagging, which is also very important for fishery science. So by tagging these sharks and being able to track them and their migration patterns, you can tell fishermen, hey, don't fish in this area at this time of year because the sharks are congregating and reproducing, and you don't want to accidentally catch them in your nets. And by understanding the migration patterns of sharks, you can better protect them. And that's when I got my shark experience in South Africa, and I was very, very excited to be a part of that. So also through the Department of Environment in South Africa, they do 2 big biannual trawl surveys, which is where they take out huge research vessels and catch everything that they can from the bottom to the top of the ocean. And then they identify all of the species so that they can really understand how many and what species are in South Africa's waters. And by doing this, I got to be exposed to such crazy, amazing marine animals from the deep ocean. You can see in the second photo here, the cat shark that we were dissecting was pregnant, and it really gave me a good understanding of the biological and life history characteristics of sharks. And this is super important so that we can protect them in the future. And the right photo here, it's hard to see, but I was actually examining the vertebra of sharks, and by doing that, you can find the age of them. And it was, again, that's important to have that data to better protect these species. But yeah, that was a really great experience I had working for the South African government here. And just this is where I live. I just wanted to give a quick overview of that. So coming from an inland city in the United States to where I live now, it really fits what I'm doing with my life. We have amazing marine life off the coast of our shores, and I live near a beach where we have trek netters bringing in catches of yellowtail, and then sometimes we get sharks and rays that I get to help put back in the ocean. We also have the only African penguin or the only penguin on the African continent, which is the African penguin that is very, very endangered. And I'm currently working on trying to protect those penguins now, because the major issue that they're facing, among others, is overfishing of their food source, which is sardine and anchovy, which is causing them to decline in numbers. And here's another really cool ray, one of the electric marbled ray that we have here in South Africa. So throughout my time since 2012, I also love being underwater and seeing creatures living their healthiest, best life. So I've gotten 3 PADI certifications. I'm now a rescue diver. And yeah, it's a huge passion of mine to be able to go underwater and see these beautiful species for myself. Also, during my time at University of Cape Town, I helped out on a cruise to Antarctica. And even though I'm not an oceanographer, I was catching and capturing a lot of oceanographic data. So every single year, there's this Gullis vessel that goes down to South Africa, and it collects this data every single year. And then that data can be analyzed over time. So we can look at, okay, how's the temperature changing in these waters for the last 100 years. We also looked at things like the salinity of the water and the pH and all these important readers so that we can understand how our oceans are changing over time. And I think we all know that our polar ice caps are melting. So understanding where the ocean is now in Antarctica is a very important job, even though, again, I tried it and I knew that this is not what I want to be doing with my life. But I think that's what you have to do a lot of the times when you're a marine scientist is, again, to try things and see what you like, even though I recognize it as one of the most important roles that you can be as a marine scientist. And while I was there, I got to see 3 different types of penguins and a few different types of seals, and that's what I loved most. And I knew then, okay, I'm not as passionate about the chemistry of the water and the ocean as I am about these creatures that I love so much that call the ocean their home. So what am I currently doing now? After my master's degree, I was lucky and I got a job with the Worldwide Fund for Nature. It's this panda logo, if you're familiar with it. It is the biggest conservation organization in the world, but we do have an independent office here in South Africa. And in that office, I sit on the SASSI team, which stands for the Southern African Sustainable Seafood Initiative. And this is so basically my work in fisheries led me to this role. And what SASSI is it's a seafood guide. So it uses a scientific system to rate fisheries and aquaculture species as green, which means most sustainable, orange means think twice, and red means don't buy. And this is a tool for consumers to use when they're buying seafood or when you're at a seafood restaurant, and it's also for the industry to use. So when they're procuring and buying product, they know what's sustainable and what's not. So SASSI works throughout the entire seafood supply chain in South Africa. So we have a team that's focused on consumer awareness. So basically telling people to use this traffic light system. And we have these tools like our app and a poster and pocket card, which shows what species are green, orange, and red. And then we work with industrial fisheries to help improve them with fishery improvement projects. And then specifically my work sits with retailers and suppliers, so getting them to buy green. So when the consumer goes in the store, they can feel confident that everything that's being sold there is sustainable. Whereas if they were selling orange and red listed species, some of those are very in danger. So they might be a vulnerable population, or they, like for instance, in South Africa, we have the West Coast rock lobster. And that's a red listed species. It's very endangered, but it's still legal to be sold. But it's on the red list so that people are aware that this is a population that's in danger. I probably shouldn't buy this. Also, for instance, we have recently rated our sardine as red because of the ecological impacts of that fishery. So we see the penguin is in decline and the sardine is their food source, and that's again in decline as well. So advising people not to buy the sardine. So hopefully there's more sardine left for that vulnerable population of penguins. And then lastly, we also work with retailers and chefs so that they're serving sustainable products at their restaurants as well. On the part-time, I also am a lecturer at the Open University of Mauritius, and that is on the sustainable management of the blue economy. So the blue economy is so important. It's looking at every single economic system that we value from the ocean. So sustainable tourism, maritime transport, renewable energy, offshore drilling, all the different kinds of economic activities that we derive from the ocean. It's ensuring that we're managing them all together sustainably so that we can continue benefiting from these resources, and there's not one activity that's endangering the production of the other ones. Also included in this is fisheries and aquaculture, of course. So now it's a little bit complicated to be a marine scientist just because our oceans are under immense threat. And a lot of people don't understand. They know that climate change is really affecting land. They're seeing the floods, they're seeing the droughts, they're seeing the fires all over the world. But a lot of people don't understand what's happening below the water. But climate change is having a very dramatic impact on our oceans. So one, with coral bleaching, as our oceans are getting warmer, they're causing corals around our world, or our oceans are changing. The chemistry is changing of our oceans, which leads to an increased pH of our oceans, which causes coral bleaching around the world. And again, that has a knock-on effect of fisheries because a lot of the fish that we consume, their home is the coral reefs. Also, I mentioned ocean acidification, and then melting of ice caps I also mentioned, which makes our oceans less salty, which changes the conveyor belt of our ocean, which drives our climate. So again, that's making our world more volatile in the weather. Also, with climate change, it's changing the abundance of phytoplankton, which means there's less nutrients available, which is the basis of our food chain, which also has knock-on effects throughout the world's fisheries. And then with the increase of temperature of our oceans, there's a change in the fish stocks because some fish are not liking the temperature of where they're historically living. So they're moving to places we've never seen them at before, that species. So it's a very complicated time to be a marine scientist, but it's also not, it's never been more important that we have as many people protecting our oceans as possible. So what are the other threats besides climate change that our ocean is being affected by? So I mentioned warming. There's also mass habitat destruction. So a lot of the aquaculture farms, they destroy mangrove habitats in order to grow things like shrimp. Also, biodiversity loss. Overfishing is one of the major impacts around the world. There's non-targeted fishing like trawling, which is collecting everything from the bottom of the ocean. There's a huge amount of pollution happening at sea and also from land that's running off into the water. And that pollution can be chemical, it can also be plastic pollution. There's lots of oil spills that happen regularly around the world. Invasive species, so species that are not from that place that are then wreaking havoc on the endemic or local species. And then there's unsustainable food production, like intensive aquaculture or overfishing. And then there's the threat of a lot of countries jumping towards deep sea mining, which we don't even know what the impacts of that could be on our oceans. So to bring it back home to Africa, so I think many of you who are here are from Africa, and a lot of you know that Africa is being disproportionately affected from climate change when it wasn't Africa that was mostly emitting all of the carbon dioxide and all of the pollution that's gotten us here in the first place. So there's more opportunities to help the ocean, and that is through being an advocate. So you can be an advocate for renewable energy, an advocate for pressuring your government to not accept new oil and mining leases, and an advocate for retributions and funding from the global north due to the historical industrial population, which has led us to this point of where we are now, which is reaching above 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, which is wreaking havoc environmentally around our world. So I talked about everything and how I ended up where I am, but I went through all of these last slides to show you that careers in the marine science field are not linear. You have to forge your own path and believe in yourself. So a lot of the times there's some spark in you that's led you to study this, and you have to keep following that spark, because working in this field, there's so many different things that you can do, and the best thing you can do is just to try as much as possible. And basically every opportunity that I've done, I haven't had to pay for. There's so much funding out there for different opportunities for you to attend global conferences or have field experience, and you just have to have that perseverance to make sure you're always looking out for those different opportunities. And to be a marine scientist, you have to have passion, perseverance, and a hard work ethic, because a lot of industries, you're selling something. So there's a lot of room for companies to pay employees to work in these industries. But as marine scientists, we're not selling anything. Our job is to protect the environment. So there can be issues with funding sometimes, but I know that if you continue working hard and you really are passionate about being in this space, then you'll be able to find your space in it. So I ended up working within fisheries, but within an NGO. So what are the other career opportunities that you can have as a marine scientist? Right now, aquaculture production has surpassed the production of fisheries, so there's a ton of jobs working in the aquaculture field. Also, other non-governmental organizations, other NGOs that have different agendas, and if you find one that aligns with the work that you want to be doing, if you're passionate about removing plastic from our oceans or anything like that, I'm sure that you can find an NGO that aligns with what you want to do there. Also, you could be an academic scientist. So what I mentioned, what I did during my master's was really was really important data that needs to be collected to understand where our species are at right now, what needs to happen to further protect them. And none of that protection can happen if you don't have the baseline, if you don't know what the current situation is. So it's really important for people to stay in academia. Next, you can be a conservationist. So if you really want to care about coral reefs or you really care about sea turtles, you can focus your efforts on that, and you could work on island or work on the coast somewhere, specifically working on conserving wildlife or protecting wildlife. Also, you can be an independent person who's projecting awareness. So basically getting news to care about this, creating content online, and working on science communication, which is a huge role to play, because if the public isn't understanding the work that we're doing or what the current status is, then how are you going to get people to care? So we need science communicators. Another role is to work in government or policy. So one of the most effective things that we can do to conserve our marine environment is to develop marine protected areas or other effective marine conservation measures. And by setting aside areas where fishing can't happen, where outside anthropogenic impacts can't be affected to the marine life, that is one of the most effective things we can do to ensure these species protection. And it also helps things like fisheries, because that basically serves as a sanctuary for fish to be able to replenish. And in the end, fisheries will have more access to those fishery resources because they aren't catching them with juveniles, or they aren't going to breeding populations and taking them out before they've had a chance to replenish their population. So I mentioned also all of the climate change impacts on our ocean. So you can be a marine scientist who specializes in climate change, or an oceanographer who specializes in climate change. And that's so important to be able to advise policy, what needs to happen, where current issues are in the ocean, and be able to mitigate and protect our oceans from further impacts from climate change. Next, sustainable blue economy. That's another big area of focus in the world's governments, and there's a lot of new opportunities in this field. So you can work in sustainable tourism. You can, instead of, a lot of the times fishers go into tourism because if they're basically they're getting people who are visiting that area to really genuinely care, and hopefully will give money or further protect these areas as well, because then it helps the fishermen as well, because they're able to protect these areas, and the fish are able to replenish themselves, and the fishers are able to access that resource in the end. There's also opportunities working in maritime transport. So engineers and things, they're working on ships to make them more sustainable, and make them ensure that these ships aren't polluting our waters, or even making sure that ships have a better route around the world, so they're not idling and polluting the air while they're waiting to go into port and things like that. So as marine professionals, we all have a role to play. In these photos, so the first one you can see, it's Paul and I. We met at our Oceans Conference this year in April. The middle photo is a group of me and other young advocates with Dr. Sylvia Earle, who's working on a no deep sea mining campaign that was at the United Nations Ocean Conference in 2022. And the last photo Paul had sent to us with he was just at the African Union at the Africa Sustainable Blue Economy Conference. And it is just so important that as marine scientists, we basically dedicate our lives to understanding and trying to help the environment, and teach people who don't understand what's going on. And we all have a responsibility to educate and demand better. So as scientists, we are the best suited to be advocates for the health of the ocean and the environment, because if we're not doing it, then who's going to? It's surely not going to be the politicians. So that's why, and no matter what career you choose, we all have to be advocates to always teach others about the importance of the ocean. Ocean health is human health. The oceans generate our climate. The oceans provide us with abundance of resources like food and different economic opportunities, and we need to make sure that we're protecting it so that the future generations can continue to benefit from these resources. And that's all I had today. I think we have some time if anyone has any questions, or I have my Instagram or email here in case you think of a question later on. I'm happy to speak to you more about my talk today.
Okay, thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you. I really appreciate everyone. I'm sure we must have learned 18 or two. And if we have questions for Alexandra, I think we need to start asking now. If you don't want to unmute your mic, you can just ask in the chat box. Well, I'll go first. I kind of like have two questions. So the
Sure.
first one is for the restaurants and the retailers that you are stopping or alerting about the endangered species that you're selling, how do you compensate them, so to say? Because of course, that's their source of income, their means of livelihood. So what do you do is there like a form of sensitization? And also not just sensitizing them, maybe like capacity building or something. What do you do?
Sure. So for businesses, it's a totally different audience that you have to appeal to. You have to go into the business mindset and think, okay, how can you get these people to act sustainable when it might be more expensive for them? But at the end of the day, sustainability makes good business sense. If these retailers are sourcing from unsustainable populations of fish, then they're depleting that resource. They're not going to have that resource in 5 years. So it's a benefit that they source sustainable so that they're putting pressure off of at-risk species so that they can continue benefiting from these resources as well. And if they're destroying habitats, if they're not supporting livelihoods, I mean, that's a big business risk to them. And specifically in South Africa, most of the big retailers are trading on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And now they have to report on their ESG if they're a publicly traded company, which is environmental social governance. So they have to report on if they're being sustainable or not. So that's a big lever of as well, which just shows how important policy is, because when rules like that come in that they have to report on this, then all of a sudden these businesses have an incentive to be more sustainable, because if they're not, then they're fined for it. And that's what they care about, is losing money. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, I think because I know that for people that maybe, of course, they love what they're doing, and then it is something they are really passionate about, and then you are just coming, giving them policies that, okay, you need to stop this thing because we think it is not sustainable. There will be resistance because they feel like we've been doing this thing for years and nothing has happened. So why are you saying it's not sustainable? And what am I going to do apart from these? What do you bring to the table? Something of such.
Exactly. And that's why our consumer awareness section is so important, which is why I mentioned science communication is such a good role to play, because by educating the public, they're going to the retailers and they're saying, hey, you're selling a red listed species. And if they're getting that from the customers, they don't want that, they don't want to be known online as being selling from an endangered species or that, because that hurts their business as well. So that's why it's so important to educate the people so that they put the pressure on the retailers to act more sustainably as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. So my second question is, how can you, in your career as a marine biologist, how do you impute sustainable food production? Because marine biology is more like just aquaculture, species where we have fish, penguins, and whatnot. But food production, food security is definitely more than that. So how to incorporate both?
Great question. So exactly what I was doing for my master's degree, that is so important, because by understanding the biology, what we call the life history characteristics of fish, then you can better manage fishery resources. So say, for instance, if we know that a fish only reproduces after 45 centimeters, then you have to tell fishermen that when they catch a fish that's less than 45 centimeters, they have to put it back, because then that fish can reproduce and continue benefiting the fishermen and the resource that's there. And also for like aquaculture, if you're polluting, like salmon farming in Norway, so a lot of people think aquaculture is more sustainable, but for instance, for the salmon farming in Norway, it can have what we call a bad food to feed ratio. So that salmon's being fed wild caught food. So sometimes it can take 4 kilograms of wild caught fish to just generate 1 kilogram of farmed raised fish. So that's super unsustainable as well with aquaculture. So you need to understand that fishery biology in order to better manage fisheries so that fishermen can continue benefiting from that resource, and that people can have more food security. Because yeah, if they're depleting that resource, then all of a sudden they don't have fish at the market, there's no more of that food left. So I hope that answered your question as well.
Yeah, it answers my questions. So let me give the floor to other people. Please, if you have more questions, please, you can unmute your mic. Ask Alex.
Thanks, Faith.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so my question is that is there a roadmap, or perhaps let's say a kind of a career path to become a marine scientist? So what I'm trying to say is that do we need to have a degree or a diploma or just an ordinary courses that after completing such course you can be referred to, or is it just a desire to become one? So I just want to know if there is a career path, or if there are actually a particular certification that one needs to have before you can become one.
Thanks so much for your question. So some people know more about fish species than actual academics who study them at university, because those people might be they might be fishermen, their parents might be fishermen, and they have indigenous knowledge of those species and the interactions between them. And they can oftentimes know more than someone who studied them for 4 years in a university setting. So definitely it depends on what kind of career path you want. Like if you just want to be a conservationist, then I wouldn't say that you need a degree from a university. Like if you live in a coastal area, you can definitely be a conservationist without it, because you can learn from others who are doing it, or you can take different courses about the kind of species that you're trying to protect, like sea turtles, for instance. So I wouldn't say in every case that you need a degree, but for certain careers, like if you want to work in government or policy, then it definitely helps to have that title behind your name and to study for a university degree. So yeah, I guess it depends what you actually want to be doing, what you see yourself doing in the long term. I hope that answered your question, but if you have an idea for what you actually want to be doing, and I can help try to provide a roadmap for how you can get there.
Um,
Did you hear Abdullahi?
Hi.
Abdullahi?
I have
Hi,
a
Abdullah.
question.
Okay. Okay, please ask your question, Bashir.
My question goes like that. Um, Although I came from northern part of Nigeria, and here in northern part of Nigeria we have limited marine environment.
But my passion for marine environment was from my childhood, like watching oceans in the TV and documentaries. So this passion led me to pursue a degree in fisheries and aquaculture here in Bio University, Kano. So I when I applied for fisheries and aquaculture, I thought it would open ways for me to become a marine biologist. But after admitting into the course in Bio University, we are more exposed to like freshwater environment, all our courses. Although we have some courses like oceanography, seamanship, and navigation, but most of our like practical experience are for freshwater environment. And the reason why I applied for that course sincerely is to become a marine biologist. So I'm asking if there is any advice from the host, any advice that she can offer for me to like get experience, especially when applying for scholarships that will put me on top to get a master's scholarship in marine biology or something like that. So that's my question.
Thanks, Bashir. If I heard you correctly, you're asking for advice to basically get you other opportunities for applying for scholarships and things. Was that your question?
Yes, yes.
Sure. So specifically within Africa, if you're from Nigeria, there are so many opportunities abroad in the Northern Hemisphere because they really want you to learn maybe a different science that they're teaching at their university so that you can bring it back to Nigeria and implement it and bring it back home and conserve your waters here or back in Nigeria. And definitely, if you have that passion, that's what you have to say is like, maybe you don't have all of the knowledge yet, but you have that will to learn. And that's really important to include in all of your applications for those different types of scholarships. And that you just care about the environment and about protecting it. And a lot of the times, if you're open and honest about having that passion and that dedication to helping the environment, that's enough to get you those opportunities in other places. But if you ever want, I can review like an application that you have. My email's here, so feel free to send it to me as well. I'm happy to help because I couldn't have gotten opportunities without help from other people. So yeah, I'm really open to reviewing anything that you have.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thanks for your question.
it.
Hi,
Hi,
Chibuike. Do you have questions?
yes, I have a question. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Chibike Demian. I have few questions concerning the topic today. The first question is, looking at our world today, it's very obvious that climate change is becoming inevitable and it's affecting different areas, especially the ocean. So what can we do? What are the steps we can take to mitigate the effects of climate change? What are the steps we can take to mitigate the effects of climate change? It's not, most times the climate change is not, the source is not particularly from the ocean. Or when we even look at maybe pollution from the land affecting the sea and the ocean. So what are the steps we can take to reduce the effect of climate change in our ocean? And my second question is this. I was opportune to carry out my internship while in my undergraduate studies.
Sorry, do you mind if I answer your first question first and then you ask you the second one so I don't forget the second one?
It's quiet. Thank you.
Sure. So let me answer your first question. So yes, you're right that it's not activities in the ocean that's causing climate change in the ocean. It's from excess carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions that we're polluting our atmosphere, and then the ocean is absorbing that extra greenhouse gases, and that's what's causing all of these implications in our oceans. And the oceans already absorb 90% of the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So if the ocean hadn't been doing that, basically we would be living on an uninhabitable planet right now because it would be so hot. And yeah, it would be really catastrophic. So the ocean's already done a lot for us, but now it's reaching the full capacity where it can't absorb anymore. So different species are absorbing that carbon dioxide. And 90% of the animals that live in the ocean are what we call, they're calcium carbonate, made of calcium carbonate. So like crabs, that's what gives them their hard shells, and lobsters and snails and all of that things. But now, all that excess carbon dioxide is making these animals not able to grow. And it's also making them more brittle. So it's affecting the whole food chain. Sorry, that's just one more big impact of climate change on our oceans. So it's hard because as marine scientists, we also have to be climate activists, not just ocean activists, because what's happening in the climate is affecting the ocean so much. So what we can do is basically stand up and saying, we're not going to allow for more oil and gas leases in our country. So for instance, and at University of Cape Town, I was a part of a green initiative, a club, and we lobbied to get our University of Cape Town, to stop investing in fossil fuels, because basically banks and big university institutions are funding fossil fuels because all of these new projects need a lot of funding to start. So you go to the banks, you go to the schools, and you say, hey, you guys aren't going to use my money to do this. I've had enough of that. And you can also be activists. Like for instance, in South Africa, Shell wanted to do a new exploration of oil off the coast, and it triggered this huge activism that happened around the country. And because of that, the government actually didn't give them permission to start doing that exploratory drilling. So I would say try to be as aware as you can of where you live and what's going on. I know that there's a lot of oil drilling that happens if you're based in Nigeria. So definitely we just have to try to stop that as much as we can in our own capacity. It's hard, but if we all come together and we're advocating for something, especially if you're a scientist and you have that background knowledge and you're pushing your government, they have to get reelected. A lot of the people are elected by us. So we have to ensure that they're doing what we want them to do, not getting money from the fossil fuel industry. And it's really hard, but there is some promise, because right now, in the last year, there was a lot more funding for renewable energy products than fossil fuel projects. So the tide is very slowly starting to turn. But yeah, what we have to do is vote for people who have environmental agendas in place, and be an activist in your own capacity at your schools, and in every way that you can. I guess that's my best advice for that.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening.
What was your next question?
Yeah, my next question is, I had the opportunity to do my internship in a trawling company here in Lagos, Nigeria. And I had a first-hand experience of, in Nigeria, we have the FDFA, the Federal Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, and they are responsible for responsible fishing, right? But I noticed that, pertinent to Nigeria, because I can say about other African countries. In Nigeria, it's the work of the FDFA it's a formality. There's nothing being done. Do you understand? Because this company works 365 days, 24 hours. They have 72 trawling vessels. They are always in the sea. And then I ask my supervisors, then what time are we giving to these organisms, these marine organisms, to replenish, to breed, so that there will be sustainable fishing, right? And then it's just formality everywhere. My question is, individually, as a scientist, as someone who is concerned about the ocean, what can we do? I think the system is too bad and it seems damaged already. So personally, like individually, what can be done? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. We have the same issue here, whereas I think you're saying like the government is on the side of the industry, so they're not putting enough regulations in place to protect the resource. And it's the same thing here. Like we have 5% of the African penguin is left because of mostly because a lot of them are starving because they don't have sardine and anchovy. And the government isn't doing enough to tell the industry to stop fishing that resource, if to save the African penguin, but if it's also going to have knock-on effects on these big target fisheries that we have, like the hake and other fish that's really important to the South African economy. And a lot of it is because of a corruption, because the big fishing companies have a lot of money. So it can feel really hopeless. I'm totally with you on that. And that's why a lot of people who worked for the Department of Environment in South Africa have now moved into the NGO space because they want to play a more advocacy role to protect these species. And just to give you the one example for the sardine fishery is a lot of NGOs in South Africa have come together and they're filing, they're basically suing the Department of Environment for not doing enough to protect the resource of the sardines for the African penguin. So what you can do is, one, you could stay working in this industry, and you can hope that with time that you can be the one in charge and have more influence and have more power and speak up and use your voice against these people who are just for the short-term profit, and they're not looking at the resource as a long-term sustainable plan to be put into place. Or you can try to find an NGO that's working to advocate, to work with policy to get policy to better protect these species. But yeah, it can be really, really disheartening when you're actually there and you see how much money they have and they don't care about protecting the resource in the long term. So I guess I don't have a straight answer for you, but to stay strong and find people that are like-minded with you and get together and talk about what you can do in your own capacity, because I get you can feel small in a big world, but I find that with finding people who are like-minded, you can work together and finding a plan on what you guys can do and actions you can take.
Thank you very much. My final question, please.
Sure.
Still on my experience, many of these trawling vessels destroy the coral reef, like you rightly said in your discussion. And then when these coral reefs are destroyed, I just want to know, is there a guideline? Are there steps to take in restoring this damaged marine ecosystem, or does it have to do with closing the area, maybe marine protected areas and all? Is there, aside marine protected areas now, are there steps to take? Because in my country, we have 0 marine protected areas. There's 0 MPA in Nigeria. It's as bad as that. So what can we do? Because it's looking like the MPA is not working. So what else can be done to restore the marine ecosystem to its rightful health status? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I totally do. And we also are struggling in South Africa to get more marine protected areas. We only have 5% of our coastline that's protected. And we're struggling to get more because there's so many stakeholders, and there's also indigenous rights here in South Africa. So they have to ensure that they don't want to basically make an area protected and then the indigenous people can't continue to benefit from that resource. So it can be very, very complex here. So what they're starting to do is basically a newer concept called OECM, which is Other Effective Marine Conservation Measures. And these are really great ways that you can make a protected area that's not basically so formally established with having restrictions on every activity. So for instance, it can be a smaller protected area that includes some land that gives indigenous people the rights to fish and use those waters, but it's protected from trawling and these types of fishing industries. So I would definitely look up OECMs and see if there's anyone who's interested in implementing any of these in Nigeria, because a lot of the times it's a lot easier to get these up and running than actual formal marine protected areas. But you also have to have enforcement, and that costs money. And that's also what we struggle with in South Africa, is that we don't feel like the government is doing enough to enforce the waters here. From IUU, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and the like. So it can be very challenging. But hopefully with the coral that they protected, you can somehow, or the coral that they destroyed, hopefully you can somehow protect this area. And what you can do is you can help the coral regrow. So what I had mentioned, my first experience in Fiji was that the coral reef was destroyed there from a hurricane. So what we had done was we built fish houses. So it's basically, you can make like a triangle out of metal, or you can use cement or other materials and even tie it with zip ties. And then you can put pieces of coral on these stands, and it helps the coral rebuild itself faster. So there are steps that you can take to help that coral regrow. But again, it's really devastating when trawling just destroys sensitive habitats like that, and they're actually making it a lot harder for themselves into the future, because the coral reefs are a nursery for those fish that they're wanting to catch. So they're destroying a lot of opportunity for further catches into the future. So yeah, it's getting people to have that. First is education, and then getting people to have the long-term mindset in place instead of short-term goals. But again, at the beginning is just education and bringing awareness to the topic. And a lot of the times, my father's Portuguese, and so I was just visiting my family in Portugal, and they're having a horrible problem with overfishing and bad fishery management. Like for instance, they'll catch lobsters that are pregnant with their eggs. So that's horrible fishery management, because you're basically just giving away potential hundreds of lobsters that you could have sold in the future. And so it's a problem all around the world. But these fishermen, they have to basically be educated so that they know that it's going to benefit them in the future if they protect this resource now. And I think that's a lot of the work Paul is working on in Nigeria. So that's a really good initiative and way to start, as well as by collaborating with the local fishermen.
Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Do we have anyone who has any questions before?
Yes, please. Let's add another question.
Okay, please do.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My question goes like this. Like with the increasing happening of climate change here which is global, it's affecting the global ecosystem. Does one need to like advance his career specifically to climate change, like getting a PhD in climate change adaptation or mitigation, or with the knowledge of marine science or marine biology, we can use that knowledge to become climate advocates or climate activities?
Sorry, what was the question there? I heard about being a marine biologist with a climate activist. Were you asking about what kind of careers or?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Sure. So I think for working as a marine scientist with a climate change focus, it would be very important to either work in academia so that you're collecting data and you're able to publish that data that hopefully will inform policy. So if you can collect data that fish are moving from historical populations to new areas, or fish aren't growing as big because of different effects in the water or lack of food resources, those types of things. So for that, like I had mentioned, data is the baseline data is the most important thing that we need for all of our future work, to be able to prove what's happening right now and put plans in place to either mitigate the effects of climate change or to just prove what's happening and to get policy to wake up to better protect our resources, or to stop polluting so much, or convert to a more sustainable energy source. So that's one way. Or you can go ahead and work in policy and work in government, or for an NGO that's advocating for better climate protections. So like, for instance, in our NGO that I work for, we have a whole climate team, and they really work closely with government to try to influence policy so that they, like for instance, our climate team just helped get our president to sign an action plan for putting in place the Paris Climate Agreement from 2015. So it's taken almost 10 years for the government of South Africa to put in place a plan to achieve what it signed in 2015 about the Paris Climate Agreement. So you can work with NGOs, or you can work within policy, or work within academia. But if you want to be a marine biologist with the climate science specialty, I would recommend staying in academia, because then you're best suited to be able to make an informed policy in place, because you have the expertise. And that's why scientists are so important and so regarded about making policies in the future, because they're the experts on this, not the lawmakers who never studied anything about the environment.
Thank you so much. This is very, very informative, and I really appreciate. Thank you.
Thanks, Bashir.
Oh, sorry. Do we have any more questions, guys? Paul, do you have any question for us, or any comments? Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Well, I have my email here in case anyone has any more questions.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Or you can follow me on Instagram and we could stay connected. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My name's Alexandra Maria Azevedo, and you can add me there as well.
Okay,
Okay.
but please, which platform do you prefer?